All right, the 2024 presidential election is just a few months away. And if you are someone who is thinking about buying or selling a home, you are probably curious about what effect, if any, this year's presidential election will have on the housing market. And it's a great question because buying or selling a home is a major decision, and it's natural to wonder just how much a major event might impact your plans. So historically speaking, looking back over the past 50 plus years, presidential elections tend to only have a small, temporary impact on the housing market. But let's not just stop there. Let's take a deeper dive into just how much presidential elections affect home sales, home prices, and mortgage rates. Number one, home sales. During the month of November, in years when the presidential election takes place, there's typically a slight slowdown in home sales. This is mostly because some buyers and sellers feel a little bit uncertain about what big decisions they want to make during such a pivotal time. However, it's important to know that this slowdown is incredibly temporary, as historically speaking, home sales bounce back in December and continue to rise and follow the following year. In fact, data collected by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, as well as the National Association of Realtors, shows that home sales actually went up after 9 of the last 11 presidential elections. Looking back since 1978, the only 2 times home sales dipped after a presidential election was 1981 and 1989. Number 2. Home prices. One of the biggest questions I have received in 2024 is what is going to happen with housing prices come November. But I think actually what most buyers and sellers are actually asking us is what do we think is going to happen with home prices after the election? And the answer is this: not a lot. The reality is an election year doesn't alter the price trend that is already happening in the housing market, which means home prices are far more resilient than you might think. In fact, home prices generally rise year over year regardless of presidential elections. And the latest data from the National Association of Realtors actually shows that 7 out of the last 8 presidential elections, home prices have increased the following year. 2009 was the only year over the past 40 years when home prices declined after an election. And as we all know, 2009 was not your typical year, as it was during the housing market crash of 2007, 2008, and 2009. And while 2009 wasn't all that long ago, today's housing market is entirely different than it was back then. Number 3, mortgage rates. Mortgage rates are important because they affect how much your monthly payment will be when you buy a home. And looking at the last 11 presidential election years, data from Freddie Mac shows mortgage rates decreased from July to November in 8 out of the last 11 presidential elections, with the only exceptions being 1980, 1992, and 2016, with mortgage rates climbing from 12% to 14% in 1980 and from 8.3 to 8.31 in 1992, and from 3.44 to 3.77 in 2016. Most forecasts expect mortgage rates to ease slightly throughout the remainder of 2024, and if these economists are right, this year will follow the trend of declining mortgage rates leading up to this year's presidential election. So if you are looking to buy a home, or if you are looking to refinance in the coming months, this could be good news for you, as lower rates could mean a lower monthly payment. All right, so we've talked about a lot here. What is the big takeaway here? Well, if you look back over time, history often repeats itself. So while presidential elections do have some impact on the housing market, the effects are usually small and temporary. Historically speaking, the housing market doesn't tend to look very different in presidential election years compared to any other years. Meaning, if you are a potential home buyer or a home seller, or if you've been on the fence the past couple years wondering what you should do, the data over the past 50 years shows us that regardless of what we may think, most presidential elections do not have a major impact on the housing market. And while it is natural to feel a little bit uncertain during an election year, history shows that the housing market remains strong and resilient. Catch you guys next time.